So we're here with Leelo Keevallik, who's Professor in Language and Culture at Linköping University. Leelo, thanks so much for agreeing to be a part of our DARGchive interview series.
Thank you so much for coming here and doing this interview with me. It's quite amazing. I was watching the videos yesterday and it was such a pleasure.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks. We have one fan. That's great. Okay, so I guess I'd like to start before your current career. So you studied for a master's at Tartu University, where you examined linguistic variations. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when and how you initially got interested in language.
Yes, that's actually very early, because I'm a native speaker of a very small language. Estonian just has 1 million speakers, so I grew up knowing that we just need to speak more languages. And that came within my family. We were always encouraged to learn languages. So that's how I first got into languages. I thought I would become a translator when I was younger. And then I entered the bachelor program at Tartu University, which was very broad. It was on Estonian philology, so it included everything from literature to language studies to Finno-Ugric studies and folklore. And it took 5 years, so that was the Soviet system actually, so everything was unified, and then the programs were really very broad and long. In Western terms, at least. And then, after that I specialized in language, which quite soon I realized that this is what I wanted to do. So that's how I got into linguistics.
Okay, great. And so you continued your research in Estonian phonetics and grammar with a PhD in Finno-Ugric linguistics at Uppsala University. Could you say a little bit about your PhD experience at Uppsala?
That was very different yet again. Different from, let's say, different what I've seen in the rest of the Western world, and also different from what it looks now in Sweden. So, actually, I came to Sweden as a visiting scholar. Because that was the only way I could pay my way. I applied for scholarships to go to different places. I first went to Oxford for a year, and then I went to Uppsala, and kept on applying for scholarships in order to stay in Uppsala. So I had scholarships for, I think, maybe like 10 years or something, so I was constantly looking for ways to learn more about language in different places. And when I had been in Uppsala like for 2 years, I originally went there to do variational social linguistics, as you mentioned. That was my great interest, and something that was actually very, very new back in Estonia. And I went to Uppsala to do variational social linguistics. I was looking for a center of where they would do something like that, and I found it in Uppsala. But when I arrived, a lot of people there were actually doing conversation analysis.
Oh, okay.
So that's part of the story. And then gradually I got accepted into the PhD program at the Finno-Ugric department. But at that time, it didn't mean that I could, have funding and things like that, which is what happens now in Sweden. When you get accepted to a program, you also, you will have funding. So I did my coursework, and then eventually I could do my PhD at the Finno-Ugric department. And that was yet another kind of I don't know. It was very broad. So I was very much alone doing what I was doing. People were working on everything from Sami verbs to Hungarian folk songs. And each and every PhD was basically working on their own, so it was not the kind of graduate schools that I hear. And I've seen people having these experiences of graduate schools and being trained and taking courses together in that sense, and that's not the kind of experience I had.
And was there a kind of difference in your analytic focus from your earlier masters at Tartu? Was there a difference in how you were approaching analysing the data at Uppsala?
Definitely. First, when I arrived, and also when I first wrote a proposal to do a PhD, I still wrote it about variation. So morphological variation in Estonian, like common Estonian, like not dialectal variation, but the way people spoke, and I wanted to explore like the correlations between like what was pronounced and what the people, where they were coming from, and where they wanted to be, and so on. So I was very fascinated by the idea that this variation could be tied to what people were, like who they were and where they came from, and so on. But then I gradually kind of moved towards this, like even more into interaction and relationships as I saw it. So I became more and more interested in like why this now, rather than the generic patterns and the percentages that come out of variational studies. And gradually I completely changed my research topic. So I collected a new corpus, a phone call corpus, an entirely new set of data, and transcribed it, and also went to UCSB for a year, which was kind of a transformative experience. So after having done the coursework that was necessary for my phonologic degree on different languages and Linguistics, and there were a lot of things that went into that degree. So after that I went and did a lot of coursework at UCSB, just to just for the for the fun of it, and to learn more. And I met Sandy Thompson, among others, who was really very important in really making me interested in that kind of way of doing syntax, which was again something that I'd never seen before.
So I wonder if you could say a little bit about when and how you got interested in embodied action.
Well, it happened on the way. I mean, somehow I decided that I would do my PhD just based on phone data, but somewhere I already knew that as soon as I was going to be done with that, I would move on, and I would not, ignore the whole complexity and reality of the messy things that actually happen when people start talking to each other face to face and so on. So I kind of knew that already when I was doing my PhD. And also in Santa Barbara, during the year I spent there, I went to a class called Language and the Body that was given by Jean Lerner and Sandy Thompson. We spent like 3 or 4 hours every Friday looking at game night, transcribing it, and getting into the nitty-gritty details, and it was fascinating, I felt that I learned a lot from that experience, and I knew that I was going to do something else after my PhD.
So I recall a remarkable plenary you gave in 2017 at the Helsinki IAA conference, and you presented video data of farmhounds mucking out a sheep stable. I wonder if you could share how you came to get the data.
I wish they would see your face in the when you are saying this, like.
So I mean, I just wondered how you particularly got interested in that data, or how you came across it.
Well, that's it kind of came to me because at that time I was, of course, already working with embodied data. I had moved into the dance, working with the dance teachers and so on, and I had the habit because I work in Sweden, spend a lot of time in Sweden, and then I go back during holidays or when I do field work only. And I even when I just go back to visit, I have a habit of bringing my camera. So that it was that kind of an occasion. I had my camera with me, and these people were going to work on the farm where I spent most of my summers helping out a dear friend. So I'd actually also been doing a student project there when I was lecturing for the first year. We had this part of the program in Tartu was that students should do dialectal recordings, and that's a lot of I did a lot of those in different parts of Estonia. But then I wrote my first grant application to do the kind of Labovian study where you just, I had an island and I recorded just everybody together with the students, like from children to grown-ups, and we did a variational study showing how the, different ages spoke differently and how different genders had different, life aims and so on, and they were also speaking differently. So that was the first project I did on that island. So it was, 93, I think. And then, so this time I was there. I had my camera with me because once I had, really regretted not having brought the camera, and there was another opportunity to do another kind of a recording, and I just had, my iPad, and it never worked out. So I had my camera, and these people were showing up, and I asked their consent, and I explained what I was going to do, and then I went into that because I had already seen how interesting it was to try to understand what people, when they are moving their bodies, a certain kind of sounds are kind of more, let's say, natural. They are kind of make it clearer, at least when it comes to dance teachers, what the movement should be.
Yeah.
They show something about the body. And I'd already gone into that topic, and especially when I was giving any kind of talk on dance teachers, people would always inevitably ask about that. So I realized that this is a very interesting thing to be looking at. And I was just interested in that, and I wanted to know how they would speak when they are, like, the bodies are heavily, like under heavy strain, and what that does to the vocal production. And still working on that data.
Okay. Yeah. And can you share some of your findings with that? I mean, this is something that's all published, but I just wondered.
Yeah.
Kind of some kind of headline.
Yeah.
Findings.
Well, like one paper I did for the volume on temporalities was to show that actually, we have this no gap, no overlap idea of a conversation, but in that kind of a setting, you might have quite long pauses. You might have the same sequences. You can initiate the repair, but it has been 7 seconds before the trouble source turn happened. So that kind of a thing, which made me think about the ways we actually collect data, and preferably in this kind of setting, when people sit around the table, or at least they are static and they are not, their bodies are not under strain. They are often doing some kind of intellectual work. Maybe they are eating, but that's, what I thought was very interesting with that kind of data. And then, of course, the strain grunts, which are really nice, because they are not just, something that comes inevitably comes out of your body when you're doing heavy work, but they actually, you can actually very nicely show that they are doing coordination work between the workers, and also signaling, for example, that I'm losing it. So that's where the grunts do work that brings everybody back on the collaboration, like lifting one piece of dung together or something like that.
So you're currently a Principle Investigator on the Non-Lexical Vocalisations project with other faculty and PhD students here at Linköping. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the work that's going on in the project?
Yeah. It's a very nice and very lively project. I have many collaborators in that project. Emily Hofstetter, she is working on, for example, on moans during board games where things have happened that make people disappointed, and she looks at how the moans are produced. Then there is Agnes Löfgren, who is working on data from opera rehearsals, and she just collected it, so she's trying to get her head around that kind of data, working with vocal sounds and how they make sense in that setting. I have also Hanna Pelikan, who is a cognitive scientist and can program robots. She came to the project and contributed this incredible expertise in human-robot interaction, and that is taking us to completely new directions that I hadn't anticipated when I applied for the project. So we have just published the first study on how humans interpret robotic sounds at home. When they get a small toy robot at home, how they interpret the sound. Mm-hmm. And then I also have a good colleague, Sally Wiggins, and we are currently looking at how moms make sounds for their babies who feed themselves. So it's a lovely data set.
And I understand that some of this work is going to be part of a forthcoming special issue in ROLSI.
Yes.
Could you share some of that information?
Yeah, so Emily's work will be an article in that special issue. Otherwise, the special issue that I'm editing together with Richard Ogden is a result of a panel at EMCA in Loughborough. So we started it all out with a call for a panel, and then we took it from there.
Just going back to the dancing you mentioned earlier. So you have an interest in embodied linguistic synchronisation, and this has been explored through dance and exercise classes. You mentioned Lindy Hop and Pilates. Is that right? Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that type of work that you've been doing.
Yeah, well, that's originates from my very personal interest in dance and dance teaching as well. I noticed how interesting things the dance teachers were doing actually with their language together with their body. And that's actually really the reason why I started recording them. And it happened, well, I had been thinking about that for quite a long time, also because of these vocalizations, but also other things that I kind of noticed being part of the community myself. And there was, I came to a point in my life where I was going to apply for things after my PhD. And of course, me being like in a foreign country, there were no obvious ways for me to go beyond what I was doing. I just, I had this PhD position and that was it, right? So I came up with this idea of proposing a project, a postdoc project, applying to go to UCLA and work with people there. I had already met Jack Goodwin at the summer course and been very inspired by by sitting with him, looking at data. It was incredible. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try, and that's why I started recording the dance teachers in order to prepare myself for this grant proposal.
Okay.
And I've been working on it ever since, and also continuously recording more more languages, more teachers, whenever I can, basically.
And could you say about how this type of work develops our understanding of understanding grammar and social order?
Well, the thing is that I think it can thoroughly change our conceptualization of grammar, because it's well, sometimes I say two extreme things, but it may, let's say, it may change our understanding of what language is, because I mean, who says that grammar starts from the mind? And that has been something that has been taken for granted for so long, that we should, you know, grammar is something that's like completely separate from the rest of the body. It's the mind. It's something like, you know, we also talk about different modalities, even in you know, EMCA research. We talk about, oh, there's verbal modality and then there is the body. But what I see in my data is it's like the separation is not crystal clear. I can't say anymore where does the body end and the language start. And I know it's kind of a far edge of language that I'm talking about, but you know, why not explore that further? And really ask like how that might really truly change how we think about grammar if we start from interacting bodies rather than from an individual mind. So and well, I have taken small steps towards you know, trying to say something like that. For example, by showing that dance teachers, they do initiate a clause, which is like a grammatical initiation of a clause, but they never finish it. However, they do make sense by terminating completing the unit by doing an embodied demonstration. So there is like a grammatical initiation and an embodied completion, and that's kind of completely natural. Even if people have never taken a dance class in their life, they can understand that when I show them the examples, because this is a very natural thing to do. I mean, this is what we all can do. I mean, teenagers do it all the time. So it's something that has been completely forgotten, or at least in the grammatical tradition where we live now. Historically, it has been different. I mean, historically, you know, our linguistic skills have been located so much more in the body, but right now it's just, you know, it's like an algorithm in your mind sometimes, or at least it's a structure in your mind, and that's what linguists work with. But why not start with the body and see what, you know, the body definitely contributes to meaning making. That's, you know, nobody can deny that. But then that it can also be incorporated into grammatical structures, and who knows where we will end up with that kind of thinking.
Yeah. So to pick up, you mentioned ROLSI earlier, and you've recently announced that you are to become associate editor of the ROLSI journal. I wonder if you could share some of your ideas about your involvement in the role, and particularly how you plan to develop the journal's output.
Well, this is all very new.
Yeah.
I'm really taking my first steps. I'm a baby editor. I'm learning from Charles and Bogdana how they have set it all up. It's very, it's quite impressive, the databases and the structuring of the work that they are doing. So I'm really just learning at the moment, and I will soon be sending out my first editor's letter. So it's that new. However, I had a very, very nice experience editing this special issue. And for example, people were reviewing. Almost everybody was on time. It was everybody said yes to review things. It was a very nice experience, and the way I think most people in our community know by now how much effort goes into a ROLSI review and into the editorial process. So you get like a really very thoughtful reviews, and you get also a very well-balanced editorial support. And that has been, during the special issue, it has been very nice doing it with Richard Ogden. It has been especially especially nice. And I'm really looking forward to that kind of work. I don't know whether I have any ideas how ROLSI should develop. The idea was that I would take responsibility for the studies that are multimodal, which I don't know yet what it means because I only just started.
Sure.
But on the other hand, I don't think my being part of this work would increase linguistics approaches to ROLSI, because there is going to be a new journal called Interactional Linguistics, edited by Ilana Mushin and Simona Pekarekdöler, which will take care of the interactional linguistics side of things, which I think will be a very nice, partner journal to ROLSI.
So just on linguistics, I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts on how the field of linguistics is changing.
Yeah, thank you for this simple question.
Simple question.
I don't think you can deny that there is a huge gap between people who believe that language starts in the brain and people who believe that language is an epiphenomenon of us interacting in the real world. And I think that this gap, it's still major. It's not easy to understand even the other side. But otherwise, linguistics is like, it's such a broad field, and it's becoming even more, branching out to in all kinds of ways. So I wouldn't be able to, for example, review any linguistics paper in any field just because I don't know the theories anymore, even though I had my training and everything, but I just don't know all the theories. I cannot keep up with everything that happens in semantics or syntax. It's just impossible.
And just thinking a bit closer to home, how do you consider the state of linguistics in the Nordic countries? Is there anything particularly specific?
Well, interactional linguistics is definitely strong in the Nordic countries. I'm seeing that. On the other hand, there is also a generativist branch of linguistics in the Nordic countries, so the gap can even be seen here, so to say. So it's not just one kind.
So another easy question, a simple question. What do you consider the main challenges facing, maybe the linguistics and the EMCA community at the moment?
One thing that I think is always discussed in the community is like, who are we? Like, where are the boundaries? Whenever you start doing a handbook or a textbook, there are these issues like who is in, who is out, where are the boundaries? Like, how far do we want to go? What is the method? What keeps us together? And there is certainly something to be won by being very inclusive. We have streams of quantitative studies these days. We have experimental things coming in, experimental ideas and experimental results being brought to bear on EMCA research, which is incredibly interesting. And I myself, I'm quite eclectic, also because mean, I've been trained in so many different ways. I have colleagues, especially if you are, as I said, from a very small country, you cannot just afford to be, you know, a specialist on one really narrow area in some sense. So I've been working with phoneticians, for example, and I find that very challenging, but also I learned from them, like how to think about language. Mm-hmm. So anyway, now I don't even remember we started this question, but it's yeah. So I mean, the challenges are maybe, you know, do we need boundaries? Where do we need them, and why do we need them? And what's, you know, what is the thing that keeps us together? What is the method that we don't want to compromise with, or things like that. But it's of course very cool to see, you know, the area expand as it has done over the past 15 years or something that I've been part of it. Yeah, so that's.
And finally, a final question. Could you share any plans or ideas you have for future research?
Well, I would like to explore this, the interface between language and the body, and that could be enough until I retire. But yes, I mean, it's currently we are doing all this work on different kinds of vocalizations, and that's taking me to different directions, like and Weatherall brought in data on pain cries, and we're working on pain cries now, and yes, Emily is also doing research on rock climbing. It's so interesting, and we're getting into exertion, the kind of like what does it do to your production of your speech when you are, you know, physically putting a strain on your body. And again, that's something that I've seen in my dance data, and I've been asking that, like how does, I mean, that necessarily has an effect on how we speak, and maybe even what we say, and maybe even what kind of structures we use, and so on. So yeah, so it's actually my colleagues who are taking me to different directions. Yeah.